You are listening to Megiddo Radio. Megiddo Radio is a radio ministry of Megiddo Films. For more, visit our website at www.megiddofilms.org.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is Paul Flynn with Megiddo Radio for the 16th of April, 2016. Thank you all for tuning in. On today's show, we're going to be talking about Bernie Sanders' visit yesterday to the Vatican. Now, as of the recording of this program, the speech hasn't really gone online, and there's poor versions that I can find, but I have what I wanted to talk about today is not necessarily what he's going to speak about. I think what Bernie Sanders, his views on the economy and things like that, they haven't really changed over the last couple of decades to a large extent. So, but what has left people scratching their heads is, why is Bernie Sanders, a self-professed democratic socialist, really, just a socialist, why is he at the Vatican? It's left some people scratching their heads, and some people thinking, well, Pope Francis is an extremely leftist pope. And how to put it? These instances have often been viewed in isolation. It didn't surprise me at all. Actually, Bernie Sanders has been praising the Pope for a very long time. Now, just to clarify, the Pope Francis himself did not invite Bernie Sanders. This was done by, let's get the name in front of me here, the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, which was started back in 1994 by Pope John Paul II. And it's independent. It raises its own funds, but when it doesn't have enough money, then, well, the Vatican steps in and props that up. Independent. How independent that can be, who knows? But anyway, so I want to look at the economic views of Bernie Sanders and the economic views of the Roman Catholic Church. Is this just Pope Francis? People will say, oh, well, he shouldn't say anything about the economy. And yes, as a Bible-believing Protestant who believes that the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, is that man of sin, the son of perdition, who stands in the place of God, declaring himself to be God, well, we should not be listening to such man. However, Rome has for a long time had views on economics which it has published, and has itself dated back in its own documents to Thomas Aquinas, and, well, Thomas Aquinas referring back himself to Aristotle. So these are not new views at all. And it's interesting too. Look who two of the other people Bernie Sanders was set to speak with. Two, as Politico puts it, two controversial leftist Latin American presidents, Rafael Correa of Ecuador and Evo Morales of Bolivia. And I mean, I've lots of clips, but for the sake of time, we're not going to be able to go past probably about 55 minutes on today's show. But there's a clip from the mid-1980s, I think it's 1984, and on the clip, and during the whole interview, Bernie Sanders, this is back in the 1980s now, when Ronald Reagan was president, was very positive as you could be, really, of communism and socialist regimes. Now, he's pointing towards Denmark and Sweden and, countries that the left is holding up as their mecca. However, back then, he was very positive of Nicaragua, of Cuba, and how great their health services and all this kind of thing. I'm not going to comment on that here. One of the main reasons for this show, and for Megiddo Radio in general, if I cover issues like this, not all the time, but I want it to be as much as possible the theological ramifications of this and applying scripture to every area of life, not just church on Sunday. So by the grace of God, we'll be able to do that in the next hour. So anyway, so it's left a lot of people scratching their heads. Why is Bernie Sanders in the Vatican at all? And there's been a bit of controversy over who invited him. And do I have the quote in front of me here? Yeah, Margaret Archer, the Academy's president, told Bloomberg News that Mr. Sanders had actively solicited the invitation for political purposes. This is from the New York Times, which the quotes Margaret Archer saying the following: Sanders himself made the first move for obvious reasons, and she goes on to say, well, to get the Catholic vote and all that. But Monsignor Marcello Sanchez Sorondo, and this is a few hours later, a senior papal official and the Academy's chancellor, awkward if you ask me, denied that Mr. Sanders had invited himself to the event, and he told Reuters the following. And get the quote just really quickly because, yeah, I'm aware the Pope, Sanders actually, from what I'm aware, never actually said that the Pope invited him. He just said the Vatican invited him. And there was a lot of confusion over that. So anyway, there's two people, one saying I invited him, and another person saying within the same organization that, I don't know what happened there. Anyway, so that's not the important thing here. What is? Sanders is undoubtedly a collectivist. Some people would say a communist. We'll get into that in a while. Yeah, he's a socialist. He believes in, if I'm going to simplify it down, that the poorer classes have the right to certain things. Healthcare. They have the right to a living wage. And you could go on through the list of rights. Yeah, you have a right to other people's stuff, apparently, according to this ideology. But it might surprise people that this thinking is profoundly Roman Catholic. For example, John Augustus Ryan, a Roman Catholic who had a massive influence on Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I'm trying to figure out if he actually was. I think he was in the administration, but be it as it may, he was a massive influence on Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal. He wrote a book called The Living Wage in 1906. I'm not saying that these ideas originated with John Augustus Ryan or even within the Roman Catholic Church. The term, for example, social justice was coined by Luigi Tapparelli, a Jesuit priest. So these ideas are profoundly Roman Catholic. They are not new. And that term social justice did not come in the 20th century. It came much earlier than that. I stumbled upon an article when I was doing research for the show from Forward.com. I've never read anything from them before, but they did point out a lot of interesting facts about Bernie Sanders' visit, shining more light on why Bernie Sanders and the Vatican economically, now I'm talking about economically and in other ways as well, socialism, how the Vatican opposes and has always really opposed capitalism. It has always opposed capitalism. But in this article written by J.J. Goldberg, it's called What the Vatican's Invitation to Bernie Sanders Says About Jews. Well, he's really talking about the Jews. And because Bernie Sanders is he's pretty much a non-practicing Jew anyway. But he talks about social liberalism. And then he talks in this article, he says, the Vatican Conference is sponsored by, and talk about the conference, by the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, a nominally independent think tank set up in 1994 by Pope John Paul II. The conclave's title is Centenimus. I don't know how to pronounce Latin, so forgiveness if anybody actually does know how to. Centenimus Annus, 25 years later is what it means. No, sorry, it's like Centenimus Annus, which is an encyclical, and it's 25 years after. And I'm going to explain what the whole, because Centenimus Annus means 100 years, and I'll explain. What's 100, basically, 100 years, Centenimus Annus was an encyclical written in 1991 by Pope John II. And forgiveness if I'm giving too many details here. But Lord willing, I might be able to go through in other shows as well. So you have this encyclical written back in 1991 called, basically in English, 100 years. And now this conference is called 100 years, 25 years later. It's meant to look back at the influence and relevance of John Paul II's 1991 papal encyclical on the economy and workers' rights. What happened 100 years before 1981? This article goes on to state that the encyclical's title, Centenimus Annus, is Latin for 100th anniversary. It was issued to mark the centennial of the 1891 encyclical by Pope Leo XIII, Rerum Novarum, otherwise New Things is what Rerum Novarum refers to. A groundbreaking declaration supporting workers' rights, fair pay, labor unions. In effect, there, and he goes on and on. So, this is the only article I could find, and I looked as hard as I could possibly find anything to do with Rerum Novarum. And why Rerum Novarum? Back in 2014, I did a show called Rerum Novarum and Jesuitical Social Justice. I think people are well aware online of what are called SJWs, or social justice warriors. And these are not all Jesuits or anything like that. But this idea is profoundly Jesuitical. Again, the term comes from Luigi Tapparelli. We're not going to have time in the show, I don't think, to actually look at the video. There's if you go on to MegiddoRadio.com and type in the word Rerum, R-E-R-U-M, Novarum, N-O-V-A-R-U-M, into the search bar. And I did a show about that about 2 years ago. I think it's actually up on MegiddoRadio.com. Better make sure I've archived that. But I did a number of shows. I also interviewed Richard Bennett, who has studied, himself firsthand in Catholic seminary and etc. and so on. Thomas Aquinas, who was a massive influence on Rerum Novarum. These ideas in the economy. So I've interviewed Richard Bennett on this, former Roman Catholic priest. There's very few people who write about this. One of the few books out there that really cover this issue is Ecclesiastical Megalomania by John W. Robbins. Now, John W. Robbins passed away a number of years ago, but I'm sure, I don't want to be one of these foolish people who says, I'm the only person talking about this. No, I know there are other people talking about this, but there's not a lot of them. And there's not a lot of people who are interested in the economy because it seems really difficult and confusing. And I'm not going to get into the spiel and the jargon that a lot of them use, but in economic news and all this kind of thing. But if you get down to the very basic language of it, it is not that complicated. But I digress. Now, let's look at, is it just Pope Francis, or is the entire Vatican officially leftist, quote unquote? Because the impression that I keep seeing when I watch all sorts of media, just trying to get a cross-reference, conservative, libertarian, Roman Catholic libertarian, anything I can get my hands on. And one thing I noticed is there's this overwhelming perception that Pope Francis is completely different to his predecessors, economically and everything else, even though his ideas are incredibly similar to Pope John Paul II. Different popes emphasize on different things, but the underlying teaching of the magistrate and the official, it's somewhat consistent. I'm not saying the Roman Catholic Church hasn't added doctrines over the years. Yes, it has. Of course it has. But what I'm saying is that on economics and their central ideas of power and control have stayed very consistent. They do change on various things from time to time. Okay. Now, I'm going to play a clip from CBSN. And this is before the conference yesterday. And I just want to look at the coverage and comment on some of Bernie Sanders' comments, and also Jeffrey Sachs, who's with him.
I want to interrupt that.
2 seconds there. I need to... Yeah, today I am under a lot of pressure to get this done in a very short amount of time, and... yeah, okay. So, this is from CBSN. This is Bernie Sanders talking to the crowd, very similar to what he's been saying for a very long time.
Dana Jacobson package to show you Bernie Sanders in Vatican City, where he is being greeted by what sounds like a lot of supporters, people there cheering him on.
Yeah, pretty robust crowd. Just a little bit earlier, they were chanting his name, and he's having a hard time actually making it through the crowd, though there's a lot of media sort of jumping in front of him. He is going to be attending a conference today. He'll be addressing that conference with a speech, and it's focused on creating a moral economy.
That's right. This is something that he felt was very important to do. Let's go ahead and listen in.
About the need for a moral economy. In my country and around the world, we are seeing a handful of very, very wealthy people become wealthier, while most people are becoming poor. In fact, the top 1% of people on this planet now own more wealth than the bottom 99%.
And why is that? I mean, and if somebody works hard and accumulates more wealth, is that necessarily wrong? Okay, if you love and it's an idol, of course it's wrong. But it's like, again, it goes back to this whole idea of collective community of goods. The eighth commandment talks about thou shalt not steal. Basically, and the commandments are summarizations as a summary of the moral law. Built into the eighth commandment as well as the idea of private property and respected private property. Thomas Watson stated on the eighth commandment, for confutation of the doctrine of community, that all things are common, and one man has a right to another's estate. This is confuted by Scripture. Quote, when thou comest into the standing corn of thy neighbor, thou shalt not move a sickle unto thy neighbor's corn. Deuteronomy 23:25. Property must be respected. God has set his eighth commandment as a hedge about a man's estate, and this hedge cannot be broken without sin. If all things be common, then there can be no theft. And I'm going to get into that in a while. And so this commandment must be in vain. The eighth commandment is there. The Bible, in no way, shape, or form. Liberals would like to say, oh, well, they'll like to claim that Jesus was a socialist himself. No, he was not. He fulfilled the law perfectly, and we are supposed to respect private property. Charity, in the eyes of a socialist, is often putting a gun to somebody's head and forcing them to give it away to charity or to the poor. It doesn't really become like that. It doesn't become, these horrible rich people exploiting the poor people. Picture like this. It is taking money from the productive sector of society. Often those are working hard. And look, if they have defrauded somebody, that is already something that what a capitalist society would take care of. As in, if you steal, you can't steal. You can't steal from a poor person, and you shouldn't be given preferential treatment, whether you're rich or poor, in the market. The laws of the state should be modeled after the moral law of the scriptures. It's quite clearly not. The reason why, I haven't checked out these statistics, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. The reason why that's happening is because governments around the world are huge. The government, I don't know what, it tripled under FDR's administration, under Roman Catholic influence, through the New Deal, and all these social programs that came out of it, minimum wage, all this kind of stuff. And things got worse after that. There isn't a capitalist country in the world. For example, I live about 15 minutes from the British border. I live in the Republic of Ireland. And, just talking to a lot of people, and you think, oh, things are pretty good, but so many of the jobs are given by the state. How long will that last for? It will only last so long until the productive sector of society is taxed to death, and then the unproductive is encouraged, or I don't know how to put this in a way, is subsidized. We should reward work. And yes, people can help people who are in trouble, but that has always happened within the church. There's always been charities, but human history has shown us anything that the state, when it has a monopoly over everything, it is not a good thing. When it controls everything, the state should, as according to Romans 13, it should withhold and it should suppress evil. It should, punish murderers, execute murderers, things like that. But its roles are very limited and kept. It cannot nurse you from cradle to grave without having massive implications on society. Because what's going to happen is and there's going to be people who are lazy. There's going to be hard workers, and there's going to be people lazy in society. And the people who are lazy in society often will be propped up. And those who work hard are given no incentive to work hard. And just because you work hard and save money does not mean you worship money necessarily. You may do. But that's something we can't legislate for. We can't legislate for the Ten Commandments. You can't put... Anyway, I digress. Let's continue with this report.
That to me is unacceptable. It is unsustainable. It is immoral. And together we have got to change that. And I have been...
And I want to challenge that. Based on what? The law of God or popular opinion? And this is based purely on popular opinion. This is based purely on envy. You've got a person in a room. One person has €1. That's the currency we use here. And another person has €10. And the socialist thinks, well, that person with €10 has to have stolen from the other guy. Maybe he did. But maybe he worked harder. I don't know. But as long as he didn't break the law to get that, that is not common. Now, maybe the person with €10 wants to help the person with €1. But you can't bring in government to put the gun to their head and say, well, you have to give money to that person. That's contrary to the scriptures.
Enormously impressed by Pope Francis speaking out and his visionary views about creating a moral economy, an economy that works for all people, not just the people on top. And what he has said over and over again, we cannot allow the market just to do what the market does. That's not acceptable. We have got to ingrain moral principles into our economy. And there is no area where that is.
It's interesting. And how do you inject moral principles into the economy? Is it from the scriptures? No, it's from the state. The state will regulate the market. So the state then gets to decide morality. The state has become God. Do you ever notice, right? Whenever a country has rejected God, who do they look to be their God? The state. The state must provide everything. If there's a problem, it's the state's fault. Or if there's a solution, the state should do it. And they look to the state to do everything for them. And everything becomes a collective responsibility. No more individual responsibilities. No more people have different roles and should fulfill those. Yes, the state has a legitimate function. but it is not there to provide every need for you. It is simply not. How, people say, oh, healthcare is a human right. Well, what level of health should we come to? Should we say that health is human right? So their rights are being violated maybe because this person has got really, really bad cancer? See, how do you determine what is a person's human right? Based purely on popular opinion and Roman Catholic thinking.
Clearer than in the area of climate change. The greed of the fossil fuel industry is literally destroying our planet. The science.
One of the most debunked theories on the planet's been getting, colder for how long? Look, climate change is completely normal. I don't even want to comment on this too much. It's just gone beyond silliness because Al Gore's models have been so, the left has been like waiting for the world to explode, and it's not happened. Back in the 70s, they thought there'd be an ice age. The climate's always been changing. Climate always will change. What this is about is control and stifling. Now, I don't believe that this is like Bernie Sanders is really thinking, oh, this will destroy the economy, and that's what he wants to do or anything. But it's about control and making the state bigger.
Scientists are virtually unanimous. Climate change is real, and it is caused by human activity. It is already causing devastating problems all over this planet. And whether the fossil fuel industry likes it or not, we have got to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And what Pope Francis has told us over and over again is we have the wealth to do that. We have the technology to do that. We have the know-how to do that. But we have got to confront is the greed of people who are so much more concerned about their own billions than the future of the children and the future of our planet. So I am just so excited to be here, so proud to be here with other like-minded people who are trying to do our best to create a moral economy. Jeff Sachs, where's Jeff?
Right here.
Jeff, come next to me. I want Jeff Sachs.
We can move back a little and keep them a little bit.
Jeff, why don't you say a few words? Excuse me.
I want to say how.
For those who are listening on the radio, this is Jeffrey Sachs, who's an economist from Columbia University.
Thrilled the participants are today at the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences to greet Senator Sanders and hear his very powerful remarks today. All day we've been discussing the enormous crisis of inequality of income, the injustice of the world economy, because we've been reflecting on Centesimus Annus, on its 25th anniversary, where Pope John Paul II warned us of these things. If greed and power is let out of moral control, we lose. Senator Sanders has been making this point.
State control, and it's interesting how, and that's the point I wanted to look at here. This is not new. Pope John Paul II, number of popes since Rerum Novarum have harked back to Rerum Novarum, written in 1891 by Leo XIII, putting forward Rerum Novarum really quickly sided with the workers, or at least appeared to. And it's been read in different ways. If you quote one part, it looks like it's putting forth socialism about the common good and things like this. Another place, it clearly rejects socialism as a solution. And then in another place, people can take it and say, oh no, it actually puts forward capitalism because it defends the right of private property. But as I hopefully will be able to show, time permitting in this episode, we got about 20 minutes left, that the right of private property in the Roman Catholic system, and in Bernie Sanders' thinking, if he believes in any kind of amount of private property at all, is subservient to the common good, or subservient to the universal destination of goods, as referred to by Pope John Paul II. Again, these are not new ideas. How do I simplify it down here? I don't want to lose anybody here. The Vatican, according to modern nomenclature, according to left and right and all this kind of stuff, the Vatican is leftist economically, which is totalitarian. What does the Vatican advocate? So I'm going to read from John W. Robbins' book, Ecclesiastical Megalomania, in which he stated on page 69, what the Roman Church state advocates is not materialistic socialism or communism, for it has denounced the materialism and classless society of Marx and other socialists. Nor does it advocate a revolutionary socialism in the Marxist sense. What it does advocate is an evolutionary socialism, a sort of ecclesiastical Fabianism, in order to restructure society along lines that are consistent with its ethical and social doctrine. John Paul II, in his 1987 encyclical Solitudio Rei Solicitus, offered that he called a faithful echo of the centuries-old tradition of the Church regarding the universal property of goods. Centuries-old tradition, according to him. In today's world, wrote the Pope, we are faced with a serious problem of unequal distribution. This was written back when Pope John Paul II was still the Pope. We are faced with a serious problem of unequal distribution of the means of subsistence originally meant for everybody, because people think, oh, well, Benedict XVI was a right-winger, and now we got a left-winger, and, there's a division within. The official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church has never gone towards capitalism, and I've never seen anything go towards capitalism. For example, right? Is this true? Okay, we've looked at Rerum Novarum. I just want to quote a little bit from Rerum Novarum. Rerum Novarum, again, was written in 1891. And considering when Rerum Novarum was written, this is when the Vatican had lost its political power. It was no longer the Papal States. The Papal States fell between 1866, and they gradually fell, and it was the Kingdom of Austria recognized Italy as a kingdom in 1866, I think it was. 1870, the Papal States were completely gone. And the Pope was no longer at that point head of a state. But you fast forward to Mussolini, and they get that power back. They have Vatican City today. Now, so I want to read just two paragraphs. This is paragraph 47 from Rerum Novarum. I'm not going to read all of it, but I'll just read the end of it. The right to possess private property is derived from nature, not from man, and the state has the right to control its use in the interests of the public good alone, and by no means absorb it altogether. Just to break that down, and again, if you read the entire Rerum Novarum, private property is not eliminated in a Roman Catholic economic structure. It's still there. And to be honest, they know, I think, deep down, it's completely impossible to go completely communist, because you'd have to get rid of the currency even. And the only place I've ever seen that really being advocated is things like the Zeitgeist movement and the Venus Project and things like that with Peter Joseph, that movie that was massive a couple of years ago on the internet. So that's... And that would be get rid of the currency. The state would own everything. And this resource-based economy, it's basically totalitarianism, but I digress. But what you have is this different titles for it. The community of goods, or the common destination of all goods, or whatever title you want to put on it, is above private property. Private property is allowed. but when the state allows it. So the state heavily regulates private property use, and this is the way it plays out in real life. Just say the state, and this happens in various different ways in various different countries. There's a thing in the American Constitution called eminent domain, and they can take land, seize land almost, in order to use it for the public good. That's not capitalist, by the way. And what you have in a capitalist society, or at least a biblical society, you own that land. You can build on that land whatever you want, as long as it's not, it doesn't cause harm to somebody or whatever. It doesn't violate some other laws that are already existing in the land. You don't need permission to size your house and what height is your house and all this kind of thing. In Ireland, if we want to build any kind of extension onto land we own ourselves, we have to go to the government, or not the government, well, it's the local authority, the local council, and ask them for permission. Please let us build something on our home. But come on, something ridiculous. I mean, we want to put on a conservatory on the back of our house. We have to ask bureaucrats for permission. What if they say no? Do you really own your property when you have to ask? As long as you don't break any laws, I'm saying no. No, private property doesn't mean you can do anything you want. I mean, you can't take somebody on your land and just murder them. But you can defend your property. And people have to respect your property. Again, the 8th commandment, thou shalt not steal. So, Roman Catholic Church is profoundly collectivist. This shouldn't shock anybody. And it's interesting who the Vatican, or the Pontifical Council, at least, or on social sciences, is getting over. 2 leftist, radical presidents from Latin America to speak on what? Morality and economy and all this kind of thing. What morality? Okay. Paragraph 36. And I'm going to read all of this just to get context. Okay. Well, maybe all of it. We'll see. Whenever the general interest or any particular class suffers or is intended with harm, class, poor, richer people, things like that, whenever a particular class suffers or is threatened with harm, which can in no other way be met or prevented, the public authority must step in to deal with it. So it says any particular class suffers, basically. And if you look at the list of so-called rights, I want to get a list here. And this is, again, this is the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church that I have in front of me here. This is called the Compendium of the Social Doctrine of the Church, which was released about a decade ago by the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. And it points back in this publication to Rerum Novarum of 1891 by Leo XIII. You have to say, what kind of suffering is this? Well, human rights, food, housing, work, education, access to culture, transportation, basic healthcare, the freedom of communication and expression, and the protection of religious freedom. And we won't get into the last few there, but come on. The right to housing, the right to work. And that's not that somebody should prevent you from working. And no, that's saying that basically jobs should be provided and the government should intervene in the economy and basically provide jobs if the social sector isn't there doing that. Anyway, for anybody who understands economic theory, that, again, takes money from the productive sector of society and gives it to the unproductive. Very rarely do government-run companies make money. I know in Ireland, for example, we have government-run companies. They're a disaster. They lose money. And anyway. So I won't go into all of it there, but it talks about the common good, defending the common good. Basically what it does is it gives the state a license to regulate commerce at every point. Oh, I got too many books in front of me here. And John W. Robbins, I'm just going to read a few more quotes about Rerum Novarum and its significance. Okay, this is from other encyclicals, right? About Rerum Novarum. Again, showing the way Pope Francis is speaking is straight out of Rerum Novarum. This is completely consistent with the compendium of the social doctrine of the church. This is an official document. This is official teaching. It says it on page 40. I'll read in a sec. We'll go to the compendium in a while. But this is official teaching. I'm not like kind of going, this, Francis does not have some obscure view that does not line up with the rest of the church history. Or, his apostate church history. It's very consistent with what the magisterium teaches. This is the official teaching of the Roman Catholic Church. John the 23rd in Mater e Magistra, by far the most notable evidence of this social teaching and action which the Church has set forth through the centuries undoubtedly is the very distinguishable encyclical letter Rerum Novarum, which again talks about intervention. It talks about of the state in order to provide for the rights. It talks about labor unions and things like that. At times it's on socialists. It's somewhere in between socialism and capitalism, otherwise known as fascism or crony capitalism. I don't even like that term because it's not capitalism. In another encyclical, this is Pius XI, an encyclical on the 40th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, and that's why it was called Quadragesimo Anno, which is 40th anniversary. So you had Pope Pius XI writing an encyclical written called the 40th anniversary. And then you have Pope John Paul II, whose ideas are very, very similar. He talks about the universal destination of all goods and all that kind of thing. If we have time, we might be able to quote it. But go back to the show I did on Rerum Novarum about 2 years ago if you want more information on this. But Pius XI writes, with regard to the civil power, Leo XIII boldly passed beyond the restricted instruction imposed by liberalism and fearlessly proclaimed the doctrine that the civil power is more than a mere guardian of law and order. It is true, indeed, that a just freedom of action should be left to individual citizens and families. Yeah, private property, but it's limited. But the principle is only valid as long as the common good is secure and no injustice is entailed. And you have to look at how did it define injustice. Incredibly similar to people like Bernie Sanders. And so the Roman Catholic Church, whatever it might want to put forward, loves when people like Bernie Sanders are coming forward. They love. This is their theology. This is their economic theory. And look at the influence it has in America. John A. Ryan is a very important figure. This is an introduction to this book, which has got segments from A Living Wage and Distributive Justice. Harlan R. Beckley and talks about Ryan's primary influence was among Roman Catholics and within the Roosevelt administration. That's FDR. And it talks about, I'm just going to go really quickly through this. By the time Ryan traveled the distance, Ryan later remembered being impressed by the first reading of Pope Leo XIII's encyclical Rerum Novarum. And it talks about it being his application of neo-Thomistic moral theology. That's what it is, neo-Thomism. And from this, you get all sorts of socialism, even liberation theology, which Pope Francis claimed to oppose. And also, for example, there's so many things you can cover here, but the minimum wage. Harlan Beckley writes, Following the publication of his dissertation, A Living Wage, that's John A. Ryan, in 1906, Ryan committed significant time and energy to starting his moral arguments for just economic policies, especially for a minimum wage. Look, if you agree with an employer, it is between you and an employer how much he pays you. Say, well, what if it's not enough to live on? Well, how about don't treat the person like they're stupid. If it is not enough, people have to count the cost before they go forward with anything. This is called personal responsibility. If there's an agreement between an employer and employee, whatever that agreement is, that's what they should work for. Now, okay, maybe later on the contract is finished, maybe you can renegotiate. And maybe they offer you a certain amount, and maybe it's not enough. Well, then you go to another job that offers more. That's called competition for workers. You see, the wages, relatively speaking, with the dollar actually being stronger back in the 1920s, the wages in the United States were much higher. The United States is the best example I can give because Ireland's never really had capitalism. It's always been in love with socialism in various forms, so I can't really give examples here, but in the States in the 20s and things like that, you'd Ford Motor Company and you'd all these car companies, and Detroit, Michigan was one of the wealthiest cities, I think the wealthiest city actually in America at the time. My wife was telling me about it, and up until the 1950s. And they paid massive wages because there was massive competition. You didn't want to pay any less because if you paid less, you would lose the best workers and they would go to another company. They would go to a competing company. Competition keeps wages high. Minimum wage, all it does is take the low, it hits poor people because they're going to be paid those poor wages and they're going to get fired. Doesn't help poor people at all. And the bigger companies can take the hit better than smaller companies. If you do not think so, that is foolish. McDonald's and the small burger place around the corner. One place is just barely starting, has got a small amount of money. McDonald's can take the hit. It won't go out of business. It won't threaten their company. And again, give people personal responsibility. Let them make their own decisions rather than, totalitarian regimes, even when they're in the most benign, at best, they just patronize people to death. So, you probably say, so what? How dangerous could this possibly be? I just want to quote, and this is traced back, and Aquinas is quoted in Rerum Novarum and in other places. I just want to read a very disturbing quote from Thomas Aquinas. This is from his Summa Theologica. Now, you don't have to read all of Aquinas' Summa Theologica. There's a couple of decades ago. I don't think there's any new versions of these anymore. But Aquinas' political writings have been compiled and put into a couple of publications. It would probably only get a second hand. But in this, and this is a compilation brought together by Don, I don't know how you spell it, D,ENTREVES. Anyway. But in the Summa Theologica, he writes, the common possession of things is to be attributed to natural law, not in the sense that natural law decrees all things to be held in common, but that there is no private possession, but in the sense that there is no distinction of property on goods of natural law, but only by human agreement, and this pertains to positive law. Just to explain really quickly, Aquinas had 4 different forms of law. Don't want to go through them all here, but natural law was something that couldn't really change. But he didn't believe, according to Aquinas, that private property was part of the natural law. He believed it was part of positive law, basically human additions that were benefit that could be taken away and back and forth. And have we already shown? Thus, he says, Aquinas writes, thus private property is not opposed to natural law. It is an addition to it devised by human reason. I'm going to skip on a little bit, and he talks about human needs and the satisfaction of human needs. Like, if a human need is met, that is his right. He has the right. He says, now, according to natural order, instituted by divine providence, material goods are provided for the satisfaction of human needs. So it's the satisfaction of human needs, and whatever his needs are, need has made a common, to quote him from another part. But listen to this. And this is where it gets really, really bad in places like South America. If, however, there is such urgent and evident necessity that there is clearly an immediate need of necessary sustenance. If, for example, a person is in immediate danger of physical privation, and there is no other way of satisfying his need, that he may take whatever is necessary from another person's goods, either openly or by stealth. Nor is this, strictly speaking, fraud or robbery. According to this theory, need makes it common. If you need it enough, you can take it. If there's no other way, you can steal. And it's not theft anymore. Need has made it common, and this is where this is liberation theology. And you get that out of Thomism, out of his political writings. Now, again, I'm not saying Thomas Aquinas and anybody who reads Thomas Aquinas are the worst people on the planet. It's not what I'm saying. But these ideas, I'm talking about the ideas here, have consequences. They are dangerous consequences. And they're being taught today. And they have massive consequences. Again, are these in any way new? They are not new. I just want to quote one last thing about the universal destination of goods. Actually, we're running out of time. Last thing I want to quote, right? The Compendium of Social Doctrine. And this is from paragraph 80. Insofar as part of the church's moral teaching, the church's social doctrine has the same dignity and authority as our moral doctrine. It is authentic magisterium, which obliges the faithful to adhere to it. This is official teaching. If you're a Roman Catholic, you are required to be a collectivist, according to this. And the last quote before I finish off, page 87 of this. And they quote here from Paul VI. Again, not new, not just Rerum Novarum, many cyclicals for the last couple of hundred years. All of the rights, whether they are including property rights and the right of free trade, must be subordinate to this norm. The norm is the universal destination of goods. They must not hinder it, but they must rather expedite its application. It must be considered a serious and urgent social obligation to refer these rights to their original purpose. Private property rights in the Roman Catholic system that, according to the magisterium, is obliged for all the quote-unquote faithful to listen, to obey, is collectivist. It's not complete socialism and communism where the state owns absolutely everything, and they hate complete capitalism. It's fascism, is what the Roman Catholic Church advocates. And notice how birds of a feather flock together. May God bless you all. Talk to you again next week.